Right before the show, Darren and I were having a little talk about low yielding areas on the farm, and Darren just said something along the lines of, well, it's really important to know where the low yielding areas are. And I said, well, that is important, but I think the most important thing is to know why the low yielding areas are low. We've got to figure that out. And so when you're going along this fall with your combine and you realize, ooh, I was at 250 bushel corn and now I'm at 150, well, just a bad area in the field. That's the way it goes. If you want to get better on the farm, you got to try to figure out why. So that's what we wanted to talk about today. What are the possible reasons why that low yielding area could be low, and how can you figure it out?
Let's take a couple of scenarios here. First of all, let's say the crop is still in the field. If the crop is still in the field and you're noticing with satellite imagery or your observations just on the ground that something's not right with the crop here, you still have a chance to do some digging, see what's going on with that root system. You also have a chance to look at the top growth on the plant. Now, if there is some sort of disease problem, if the leaves are still somewhat green, you may be able to tell what that problem is. Once the combine rolls through, all that visual evidence goes away. So it's a good chance right now to look and see, well, why didn't the soybean rows fill in? How come they didn't completely canopy in this little zone versus that zone? When the crop's still out in the field, you can check.
That's why we think satellite imagery is just incredibly helpful, because it's basically like getting your yield monitor data in advance. So now you actually have time to go figure out why you had a problem. And that's the reason why we're talking about this today. Because if you're stumped this fall, when you go through with your combine, you have your yield monitor and you hit some bad spots, you can't figure out what's going on exactly, you got to go back to the drawing board next year and say, you know what, I need satellite imagery. Maybe I need to get a UAV on my farm and get some pictures, just little aerial shots once a week or something like that, so you can track it through the year. Those areas will start to show up in a lot of cases, and then you've got to do the painstaking work of going out there, doing actual field evaluation, looking at your crop, and like Darren said, in many cases, digging up some plants. You also should consider doing plant tissue analysis, pulling soil tests from the really bad areas. So it's important to know where those bad areas are, but once you know that, now you've got to go that extra mile and figure out, why do I have a problem?
So in soybeans this year, for example, there are a couple of things that popped up. Soybean cyst nematode, root knot nematode. Nematode issues were prevalent, and we saw many guys just looking at something's wrong on the satellite image, or I don't see crop canopy, doing some digging, sending in some nematode tests, and finding out that's what the problem is. The other thing that we saw was disease this year, and it could be white mold, especially in the upper Midwest if you're in an area that got lots of rain this year. Whether you've harvested or not, depending on which disease it was, you may still see it out in the field. Okay, now let's take the other situation of I don't have crop in the field anymore. Like I said, you may still see something in the residue. You may also just target those areas and do some digging. You can still see some things on the root system, like heavy rootworm pressure, for example. You may see stalks that were goosenecked. Even if there's only a stub of that stalk left, you could still see it. You could still see that the roots are chewed off, those types of things. So just because the season is over in those fields doesn't mean you can't do some digging.
The big thing I wanted to stress here today is it's hard work to figure out why you've got the problems that you do. And believe me, we have the same issue on our own farm. We've got spots that are not yielding well. So we need to do tissue samples, we need to do soil samples, but we also have to dig up roots. We've got to try to figure out during the season where we have problems and actually walk in the field, because otherwise it's really hard to pick out weeds, insects, and diseases late in the season. So certainly some of that stuff might be evident when you're harvesting, but in a lot of cases it's not. So all we're trying to say here today is, yep, it's great that you got these nice pretty maps showing you where you have yield problems. Now let's take the next step and figure out why. And if you can't figure out why this year, you got to be determined next year, hey, I'm going to get satellite imagery, or I'm going to have UAV shots or something. So during the season, you can identify where the bad areas are, go out there and figure it out.
One thing that may still be standing in the field so you could figure out the problem easily is our weed of the week. But solving that problem may not be so easy. We'll show you how later in the show.